Embrace the probability of your imminent death, and know there's nothing I can do to save you.
Welcome to part 12 of the ultimate Sunrise on the Reaping deep dive. This is it. This is the final part. I'm covering chapters 27 and the epilogue and overanalyzing it as per usual. When I published the first part of this deep dive over 6 months ago, I was not planning for it to have 12 parts, but that's how it shook out, and it's just all pretty perfect given our beloved victors of District 12. Reminder, in this deep dive, I focus on the books in this series, not the film adaptations, and this video obviously contains massive spoilers for the entirety of Sunrise on the Reaping. Each chapter review is organized into 7 sections. There's the recap, character analysis, symbols and themes, lore and world building, possible foreshadowing, series connections, and notable quotes. If you'd like to watch or listen to this without any interruptions, the ad-free version is on my Patreon just for a few bucks a month, along with all of my long-form videos, the option to download them as podcasts, and there's monthly live stream hangouts and a few other bonus content things. This is also your gentle reminder to please consider volunteering or donating to food banks if you're able to do so, and I have some resources linked below. And with that, my buddies and sweethearts, it's time to dive in. I am psychically available to hold your hand through the ether and wipe the tears from your eyes. Chapter 27, Recap. The nightmare always starts with Haymitch feeding her that gumdrop. He and Lenore Dove are in the meadow, embracing and crying with happiness. He doesn't check the bag. He never checks the bag. If only he could remember to check the bag. He always discovers too late that the gumdrops aren't rainbow. There's only blood red. The dream plays out the memory. His realization, her terror, the bloody foam, the way he begs her not to go, and she makes him promise to stop the sun from rising on the reaping. The dream picks up where chapter 26 ended, revealing what happened after Haymitch kissed Lenore Dove for the final time, tasting the poison on her lips. Then her uncles came to the meadow. Clerk Carmine ripped her out of Haymitch's arms and shouted her name as he tried to restart her heart. Tam Amber stood there watching, shaking his head and mumbling, "Not again. Oh, not again." Then, within Haymitch's nightmare, the music kicks in, her name poem, her song, careening around his brain like a runaway train. Of course, he's referring to the Raven. The entirety of the poem makes it into this chapter, broken up into sections throughout. We'll go into the depth of this meaning later, but the gist is it's about a person losing their grip on reality due to immense grief over their lost love, Lenore. Haymitch identifies as that narrator in the poem, mocked by the unforgiving songbird, reminding him that he will never get to love anyone ever again, because Snow would make sure they end up dying a horrible death. So for their own protection, Haymitch pushes away anyone and everyone who could ever have been considered dear to him. Everyone from neighbors, peers, Hattie, customers, and of course, his best friends. I have to read this next passage in full. It's too perfect to summarize. Blair and Burdock hang on the hardest. Blair finally acknowledges the truth of my position, gives me one final hug, and leaves sobbing. Even then, Burdock insists on showing up, sometimes along with Astrid, who brings bottles of sleep syrup. Defiant, deaf to my pleas, I resort to throwing rocks hard at them. It takes one hitting Astrid on the forehead, blood pouring down her perfect face, to finally get them to leave me alone. Hurting her that way feels worse than anything I did in the arena. Can somebody please hold my hand? What do you mean Haymitch threw a rock at Katniss's mom and it hurt worse than anything he did in the arena? Suzanne, you didn't have to do this.
Peeta!
Then Haymitch's solitary lifestyle really begins. He exists in silence, seeing nobody, locking himself in his house. He's able to stay home since every week he gets a delivery of money and food. A peacekeeper brings it, sliding the envelope of his victor winnings under the door and the food parcel on the porch. On the envelope, meat and bread and milk and various supplies have been meticulously deducted. Haymitch doesn't know who arranged this for him. Truthfully, he wants to die, but is stopping himself from welcoming death because of his promise to Lenore Dove to somehow end the reapings, end the games. Drinking bottles of sleep syrup becomes routine. It's his attempt to escape reality, only to feed Lenore Dove gumdrops in his dreams. I'm imagining all of this as a movie montage with Woody Harrelson doing the voiceover, and I'm in pain. One night, Haymitch wanders to the District 12 cemetery searching for Lenore Dove's grave, but he doesn't find it, so he goes to the Covey's house. He narrates, "I roam around the yard like a stray dog, curl up under her window, yearning for her ghost to find me. It must be 3 a.m. when the fiddle begins, soft and low, playing her song." This sets Haymitch off. He pounds on the door screaming, "Where is she?" And then the fiddle playing stops. Eventually, when Haymitch runs out of sleep syrup, he takes up drinking bottles of rot gut, which is very poor quality, potentially toxic liquor. Haymitch attempts to drink himself into oblivion. Sometimes he's successful, and when he's not, he wanders around in the night, sometimes passing out in his yard. One morning, he realizes that Lenore Dove must be buried in the woods, in the Covey's beloved place. Haymitch spends weeks searching the woods, desperately calling Lenore Dove's name as if the Mockingjays will lead him to her or she'll appear herself. She doesn't, but Burdock Everdeen does during one of his hunting trips. Haymitch narrates, "Burdock has not forgiven me, will never, but is not beyond pity. Perhaps because he knows what it is to love. If you want her, come on," is all he says. Mercifully, Burdock leads Haymitch deep into the woods to a hidden grove containing the Covey's secret graveyard with beautifully carved headstones. There's no names, just excerpts from their name poems. A white stone with the snippet of, "Lady," he said, "Maud Clare," he said, "Maud Clare," and hid his face, presumably for Maud Ivory. A mossy slab of slate with, "Yet some maintain that to this day she is a living child, that you may see sweet Lucy Gray upon the lonesome wild," for Lucy Gray. And a gray rock with pink and purple specks with, "But the silence was unbroken, and the stillness gave no token, and the only word there spoken was the whispered word, 'Lenore?' This I whispered, and an echo murmured back the word, 'Lenore,' merely this, and nothing more," for Lenore Dove. White stone like ivory, slate for gray, and gray with pink and purple for Dove Gray. Haymitch proceeds to lie on LD's grave and stays there for 2 nights, talking to her, begging for her to come back, to wait for him, to forgive him for his failures. And he buries the flint striker, asking for a sign that he can let go of the promise to stop the reaping and die now so he can be with her. He goes home and falls asleep, where he feeds her another gumdrop. His drinking only gets worse. He wakes up in random places around the district, and one morning he wakes in an alley and sees a graffiti message in orange spray paint. It says, "No capital, no hanging tree. No capital, no reaping." Maisley's voice pops into his head, how she said Lenore Dove is full of surprises, full of secrets. She had connected the dots between the orange paint on Lenore Dove's fingernails to this graffiti. Or she caught her doing it. Haymitch takes this message as a sign from Lenore Dove that he must keep his promise. With that, she condemns him to life. The gumdrop dreams shift to night terrors of Panache and Silka hunting him, and he starts sleeping with a knife in his hand. One day, Effie arrives to take him on the victory tour. She says she's sorry about his family's accident and his girl's appendicitis right after. Proserpina and Vitus are there to prep him, clothing him in another Great Uncle Silius suit. And Plutarch's there and informs him that Magna was fired for negligence and Drusilla broke her hip falling down an escalator. It seems Maisley was right about those heels being dangerous for a woman her age. Plutarch with the shade. He says he helped Effie get the gig as District 12's new escort. They all get on a different upscale train. Even Tibby is there. He's the one who brought in the sandwiches and the pineapple cake. Haymitch drinks the train's booze despite Effie's efforts to stop him, and the first stop is in District 11. Haymitch tries to look for people who could be related to Lulu in the crowd, but he can't see anyone distinct. There's a party later that night, and Plutarch sneaks him upstairs to an attic that isn't bugged. Haymitch is drunk but coherent, and he asks Plutarch how it's possible he's here, totally fine, when Wyrus and Mags were tortured. Haymitch also figures Beatty is dead, but Plutarch tells him that he's too valuable for the Capitol to kill, and he hasn't taken his own life because his wife is pregnant, and he wouldn't let Ampert down that way. Haymitch is so over Plutarch and all of this. He's making pessimistic comments about the rebel cause. He sees himself as a failure that the rebels don't want, and he doesn't want help from anybody in the Capitol ever again. He got burned pretty bad. Plutarch doesn't back down, though. I'm gonna read this dialogue exchange. Plutarch says, "We do want you. You shook up the Capitol both figuratively and literally with that earthquake. You were capable of imagining a different future. And maybe it won't be realized today. Maybe not in our lifetime. Maybe it will take generations. We're all part of a continuum. Does that make it pointless?" Haymitch responds, "I just don't know, but I do know you need someone different from me." "No, Haymitch, we need someone exactly like you. Just luckier?" And Plutarch goes, "Luckier, or with better timing. Having an army at their back wouldn't hurt. The rebels will find an army or build one if needed and go to war." And Haymitch is critical of them going to war and killing each other, and Plutarch sarcastically says that if Haymitch can think of another way to stop that sunrise, let him know. For the rest of the tour, Haymitch avoids Plutarch. At the party in the Capitol at the end, he's put back in his comfy cage, meaning, I assume, the golden bird cage. Then they go back to 12, and Haymitch dreads going back inside of his house. He sees it as a prison. He tells Plutarch he has nothing to live for, and Plutarch assures him then that he has nothing to lose. That puts him in a position of power. That's pretty bold. Haymitch is pissed at that and says, "You think you're a good person, don't you, Plutarch? You think you're a good guy because you told me about the sun and the berms, when what you really did is help create the Capitol's propaganda and broadcast it to the country. 49 kids died for it, but you gave it the old heavens be spin, and in that propo, you're some kind of hero." Plutarch takes a moment to answer. "I'm nobody's idea of a hero, Haymitch, but at least I'm still in the game." Mic drop! And then Haymitch continues living in misery, lonely and unable to escape his grief. He doesn't even have any mementos of his family or Lenore Dove left, since all are burned or buried. Haymitch actively tries to forget them, erasing their voices and faces from his memory. The constant stream of Capitol news on the television is the only human contact Haymitch allows. That way, if Lenore Dove's ghost ever comes, he can say he's working on a strategy to keep that sun from rising. Haymitch, please! I'm reading the rest. Haymitch narrates, "I make no plans, have no hopes, keep no company, speak to no human being except old Bascom Pie when my Nepenthe runs low. But I can't say I have no future, because I know that every year for my birthday, I will get a new pair of tributes. One girl and one boy to mentor to their deaths. Another sunrise on the reaping. And when I remember that, I hear Sid's voice, waking me the morning that Raven first tapped on my chamber door. Happy birthday, Haymitch." End of chapter 27, the final chapter before the epilogue. And reminder, the first line of chapter 1 is also happy birthday, Haymitch. Suzanne, how dare you? Birthdays are hard enough. Now for character analysis. Haymitch. When I think of him, I just feel heartbroken. I physically feel a hollowness in my chest. This process of him isolating himself is ow. I'm so curious what he actually said to people to get them to stop talking to him. I mean, the method of driving away acquaintances had to differ from his close friends. I'm imagining he avoided and ignored the acquaintances and was deliberately rude or mean to Hattie and people who were closer to him, but not close enough for him to have to explain himself. And then it's the people like Blair and Burdock who he had to flat out say things like, "Being my friend is not safe for you, and you have to stay away from me." With the threat of surveillance, I figure he wouldn't say flat out that Snow killed his loved ones to punish him, but he doesn't have to do that. Like, anyone in 12 could draw the conclusion that the Capitol was involved in those deaths. Bad things happened to the loved ones of the lone living victor of District 12 right after he came home from the games. Like, That's enough to scare a lot of people away. Once Blair finally acknowledges the truth of Haymitch's position, he let go of their friendship. Haymitch's position being a highly visible person owned by the Capitol, and anyone in his sphere is at great risk of being harmed. I mean, they're all owned by the Capitol, but there's a spotlight on Haymitch. I just really love Blair so much. He's so caring, and the way he gave Haymitch one final hug and leaves sobbing. Haymitch's best friends really, really loved him. Like, they were good people, and they saw Haymitch's goodness, and I can't handle it. I can so easily picture Peeta in Blair's shoes and acting the same way. Stop! I will admit, Haymitch wanting to die but stopping himself because of his promise to Lenore Dove was sort of hard for me to believe at first. What he went through in the games and then after is horrible beyond words, and his substance abuse makes complete sense, and it's not like he has access to therapy or any sort of medication that could help him. But I think a big reason he doesn't take his own life is because he believes he deserves to suffer. It's not just because he made that promise on Lenore Dove's deathbed. Haymitch feels unworthy of the relief he thinks death will bring. So I see the combination of the promise, the compulsion for self-punishment, and a tiny, deeply buried smidgen of hope is what keeps him going for all these years. Also, his sleep syrup habit makes him sending Katniss some of that to drug Peeta in the 74th games hit a bit differently. Just that Haymitch has a complicated relationship with that medicine, and he used to get it from Katniss's mother. Okay, let's talk about Burdock and Astrid. I'm sick. I'm deathly ill over the way things ended between them and Haymitch. I'm imagining Haymitch and Astrid having these private conversations during the trilogy era when they're living in Victor's village. Or maybe they never talked, but they just quietly acknowledged this complicated history. I think that she forgave Haymitch for the Throne Rock. I think she understood that he was hurting and desperate, and he didn't actually want to hurt her or anyone.
He did not mean to hurt you.
I see Astrid and Burdock having this mix of sympathy and pity, and Burdock was angrier about the rock than Astrid. From Burdock's perspective, his best friend hurt the woman that he knew Burdock loved. It was an unforgivable line to cross, and he crossed it. If the roles were reversed and Burdock threw a rock at Lenore Dove's face, Haymitch would have reacted the same way, probably worse. I think he would have fought him. This final confrontation the three of them have is just... Astrid was still trying to take care of Haymitch as a healer. She and Burdock were determined to care for him, to stop Haymitch from destroying himself. They wanted to help him so badly because they cared, and they're good people. When Haymitch realized nothing he could say would keep them away, and he threw the rock, I'm picturing this happening in the front yard. Burdock and Astrid, they show up at his door. Haymitch comes outside. He's yelling at them to go. He picks up a rock from the ground and maybe threatens to throw it at first, and then Burdock doesn't back down, and Haymitch throws it at his leg or something. Haymitch feels he has to hurt them in order to make them scared and or angry enough with him to leave and not come back. It seems like Haymitch was in a frenzy when he's throwing the rocks. He's not putting much thought into his aim. But I don't know, maybe he did deliberately throw one of them at Astrid's forehead, knowing the effect it would have. The line is, I resort to throwing rocks hard at them. It takes one hitting Astrid on the forehead, blood pouring down her perfect face to finally get them to leave me alone. So he meant to throw the rocks hard at their bodies. I'm guessing the forehead one wasn't the only rock that actually made contact, or maybe one had only hit Burdock at first. That changes things a bit. Like if Burdock was hit with a rock and was bleeding but still wouldn't give up, and then Haymitch could make the choice to hit Astrid since he knew Burdock wouldn't stand for it. There's also kind of a parallel between Astrid getting hit in the forehead like this and when Katniss was hit by Clove in the 74th games. When they had their confrontation at the feast, Clove was throwing knives at Katniss. One of the knives slices Katniss's forehead above her right eyebrow, and blood is pouring out of it down her face. It's a pretty intense cut, and when she does finally make it back to the cave, she passes out and Peeta wakes up seeing her in a pool of blood. And then he does help take care of her. When Astrid was introduced in chapter 1, Haymitch also describes her as having a perfect face. Astrid's the town beauty. And then he marks her face, probably scarring it. I'm screaming internally in case that wasn't clear. Now I'm thinking of the 74th Reaping from Haymitch's perspective, and he sees Primrose Everdeen walking towards the stage, looking so much like her mother, and then Katniss is stepping in to protect her, looking like her father. And also,
Peeta.
Also, Burdock is in the woods in the hunting jacket with the bow, and then Katniss wears that same jacket and uses that same bow. When Haymitch properly met Lenore Dove in the woods for the first time, Burdock was the one to lead him to her, and then he leads him to her grave. Wow. 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 Burdock also, he had a wild turkey tied to his hip. And yes, Katniss also hunted wild turkeys, but this lines up with a moment with Gale specifically. When Katniss had him meet her at the hut on the lake to tell him about Snow's warning, he appears with a bow slung over his shoulder, a dead wild turkey he must have encountered along the way hanging from his belt. This turkey is what got him whipped later, and then he's brought to Astrid's house to be healed by her, and Haymitch says, oh, we used to bring everyone to her when people were whipped back in the day. Wow. Let's talk about the covey. The million-dollar question is, what did Tam Amber mean when he mumbled, "Not again, oh, not again," as Clerk Carmine attempted to restart Lenore Dove's heart? Such a loaded, cryptic line. Without any bigger theorizing, the implied meaning is that this has happened before, that a woman of the covey has died. We know that Lenore Dove's mother died in childbirth and Lucy Gray disappeared and or died. We know that there are headstones for Maude Ivory and Lucy Gray in the woods. These may or may not have their actual bodies buried beneath them, since they could simply be memorials. But based on everything we've learned in this book and the timeline, I'm 99% certain that Maude Ivory is Lenore Dove's mother, so that would mean her body is in that grave. Lucy Gray's fate is more vague, so it's a toss-up if the covey ever found her body and buried it, or if this is a memorial gravestone. I lean towards the idea of her body never being found because of the engraved excerpt, yet some maintain that to this day she is a living child, that you may see sweet Lucy Gray upon the lonesome wild. In the poem, the girl disappears in a snowstorm. Her footsteps are found and abruptly end on a bridge, and this uncertainty of her fate left people believing she didn't die or she did and became this eternally wandering ghost. She metaphorically entered the afterlife when she crossed this bridge. She's a living child because she's remembered as a child since nobody saw her grow up. Because of this context from the poem, I think Lucy Gray's body was not found, and the headstone is a marker for her as a presumed dead, missing person. Maybe she lived and was just never seen again, or she died and her spirit wanders the woods. I'm not denying the possibility that her body was found, and I'm not denying the possibility that she walked somewhere else and was still never seen again, but I do not agree that she somehow snuck back into District 12 and remained undetected when she was wanted for murder by the mayor. I will not subscribe to that Lucy Gray is hiding in District 12. Sorry. The unknown mystery of Lucy Gray is meant to have this head-spinning effect on the reader the way it does on Snow. He never got that closure. He never knew exactly what happened. I know there's a popular theory that Snow found Lucy Gray right after he shot her, and then he dumped her body in the lake along with the guns, and then Snow had a traumatic mental wall-up that stopped him from admitting and or processing that this happened. Like he just lied to himself about ending Lucy Gray's life because complicated feelings. It's not a theory I personally subscribe to based on the text, but I won't deny that it is possible. That's the point. All of these things are possible, but we don't know for sure. Though I will point out that two of the talking points I've seen as evidence for Snow dumping her body in the lake are incorrect. Sorry. First one is that in the ballad film, when Snow sees Lucy Gray when he shoots her, her dress is the one from the arena, the rainbow dress, instead of what she had on in the woods, and that this is a signal that Snow is hallucinating, so we can't trust that what's happening on screen is real anymore. I don't know where that idea came from, because as you can see here in the movie, she's clearly not wearing the rainbow dress. She's in her runaway outfit, and that's just movie lore, and in the book, when Snow sees her running away, he says nothing about her clothes. The second talking point I'd like to debunk is from the book, and it's a misinterpretation of this passage. It's using a pair of his socks as gloves, he wiped off the murder weapon, crammed all the weapons back in the burlap bag, hoisted it over his shoulder, and ran to the lake. Judging it heavy enough to sink without being weighted down with rocks, he plunged into the lake and towed it out into the deeper water. He submerged the bag and watched it spiral slowly down into the gloom. I've seen this point about the weight of the bundle being misremembered or misconstrued as it being heavier than expected, and that means that it's Lucy Gray's body and not just the guns in the bag. But that's literally not what this line says. Snow doesn't say it's heavier than it should be. He just says the bag has enough weight that he doesn't need to add rocks to make it sink. Which, yeah, that makes sense for rifles. Like, they're made of heavy materials, correct? And if it was actually Lucy Gray's body, he would probably need to add rocks because bodies float. I'm not denying you can make a theory that Snow did end up putting Lucy Gray's body in the lake, but using this line about the weight of the bag as evidence doesn't track. I also feel Snow's behavior in Sunrise confirms his uncertainty about Lucy Gray, that he didn't see her dead, and he's always wondering exactly what happened. You can make the point he mentally blocked it all out, okay, but this is in the ballad epilogue. Lucy Gray's fate was a mystery then, just like the little girl who shared her name in that maddening song. Was she alive, dead, a ghost who haunted the wilderness? Perhaps no one would ever really know. No matter, Snow had been the ruination of them both. Poor Lucy Gray, poor ghost girl singing away with her birds. So according to that epilogue, what happened is a mystery, and Snow never found her. Maybe the Covey found her body in the woods, maybe she managed to stumble back towards District 12 and they found her in the meadow dying or already dead like Lenore Dove, or maybe the Covey searched and never found her. Tam Amber's "Not Again" lends to the image of Lucy Gray stumbling into the meadow wounded and dying in the arms of the Covey, but it by no means confirms it. By the way, it canonically takes 2 to 3 hours to hike back from the lake to the Covey's house, so it's a long trek, especially if you're wounded, which she may or may not have been. Without getting too far away from the facts, Tam Amber's meaning behind "Not Again" is regret that another Covey woman is gone too soon. Period. Again, since Snow is to blame for the loss of Lucy Gray and Lenore Dove. Again, since Maud Ivory most likely died with the remaining Covey around her trying to resuscitate her after she gave birth. I see the again as this overlap of these two other deaths. Plus, after Tam Amber says this in Hamish's dream, the Raven poem song begins, which has that repetitive grief element. Nevermore and nothing more, repeated again and again. The Covey mourns the third lost woman. Unless Barb Azure did something that made the rest of the Covey hate her, I think we can safely assume she's still alive, and that's why there's no grave for her in the Covey cemetery, and that she is the distant Covey relative on Burdock Everdeen's Maud's side of the family. To get a better idea of Maud Ivory's situation, we can look at her namesake poem, Maud Clare by Christina Rossetti. In the poem, Maud Clare's in a love triangle with Lord Thomas and Nell, and he ultimately marries the more wholesome, socially acceptable Nell. After those two get married, Maud Clare gave Lord Thomas these contemptuous wedding gifts, like the necklace he gave her, and his stuttered response is the inscription on Maud Ivory's headstone. "Lady," he said. "Maud Clare," he said. "Maud Clare," and hid his face. He is ashamed of himself for betraying her. Obviously, when Maud Ivory's parents named her, her future wasn't known, but within the story, if we take her poem as tying into her fate, as I think Suzanne Collins intends, then Maud Ivory was in a love triangle, became pregnant, and the man of higher status chose to be with someone else. Maybe Maud Ivory's lord was a peacekeeper or someone who worked in the Justice Building. There is a mention in the book that once in a blue moon, a seam girl falls for a peacekeeper and ends up with a baby, resulting in plenty of social disapproval in 12 as well. But there's never any talk of the kid going to the capital. Most are simply disowned by the father, who's then shipped off to another district. So something like that could have happened with Maud Ivory, but it's also said several times that it's rumored that Lenore Dove's father was a Chance, which would not be a peacekeeper, he'd be a rebel. Maybe she was in a love triangle with him and the peacekeeper? I don't know. Anyways, I think it's possible the Covey chose to engrave that particular line on her gravestone to cement that the blame is on this man for abandoning her and contributing to her death. Though also these words could be from the Covey, saying her name as she died and hiding their face in grief. Maybe it's a bit of both. I have some other notes on Clerk Carmine specifically. So he is the last original Covey member standing as as far as we know. He was part of the handful of people who escaped the firebombing of District 12 and got all the way to District 13, and he was the fiddler at Annie and Finnick's wedding. You can make this inference in the book, but Suzanne Collins also confirmed it in an interview when Ballad came out. Katniss narrates, "The music is provided by a choir of children accompanied by the lone fiddler who made it out of 12 with his instrument." Since Clerk Carmine is the only person in the series we're introduced to who plays the fiddle, then you could draw the conclusion that that's him. I personally don't count things that an author says outside of the book as book canon, but since you can make the inference without Collins saying it, then it's fair game. She wrote the inference in the book and I think retconned the fiddler element when writing Ballad. Also, I don't believe Clerk Carmine was antagonizing Haymitch when he played the song on the fiddle. It seems like he had no idea Haymitch was there, like he was just laying on the ground outside the window. How would he know? And then Clerk Carmine stopped playing as soon as Haymitch made himself known by screaming. On to Lenore Dove. So we finally learned Lenore Dove's big secret, and I'm sure I'm not the only one who was sort of let down by it. It's important, don't get me wrong, but the way Maisie teased it, and we were left wondering what it was for most of the book, made me think it was something more scandalous than a spray-painted message hidden in an alley that nobody really sees. I'm sorry. Lenore Dove's other big rebel moves were tampering with a noose for a public execution and starting a fire at the reaping. Compared to that, the spray paint, it's pretty tame. But whatever. Haymitch needed this sign to keep carrying on and trying to stop the games. The quieter form of rebellion here shows that Lenore Dove had gotten better at not being caught, and that a revolution builds step by step, and the act of challenging the oppressor's propaganda is important. According to Haymitch, the placement of Lenore Dove's message was in an area beyond the Peacekeepers' radar, so she didn't want them to see it. It's for the people of 12. Give them some inspiration to rise up. It could also just sort of be an outlet for herself, like even if nobody sees it, she gets the satisfaction of painting her poster and putting a twist on the Capitol's propaganda. She painted the words, "No Capitol, no hanging tree. No Capitol, no reaping." She's saying the Capitol is murdering us. It kills children in the games, it kills adults in our town. All ages are eligible for public execution under the Capitol's rule. A world without the Capitol in power means life and safety. In Chapter 1, the Capitol's slogans around 12 were "No peace, no bread. No peace, no security. No peacekeepers, no peace. No Capitol, no peace." And in the Capitol, for its residents to see, there were the slogans, "No peace, no prosperity. No Hunger Games, no peace." So the underlying message to the district folks is, if you rebel, you will starve and be unsafe. Our military officials are what keep you fed and safe. The Capitol government keeps you fed and safe. So eat your scraps of bread or eat nothing at all. And their underlying message to the civilians in the Capitol is, if you rebel, you will lose the luxury and comfort that we provide. Making the district people suffer is necessary for your luxury and comfort. Eat your bread, enjoy the circus, and we'll handle the rest. Both the districts and the Capitol display the banner of Snow's face with Panem's #1 peacekeeper, driving home the point that President Snow is the reason you're alive to read this message. If you disobey him, you will lose everything. Lenore Dove also referenced these Capitol slogans when she was on the phone with Haymitch after she'd been arrested. Haymitch asked what the charges were against her for singing in the square like that, and Lenore Dove said, "Disrupting the peace or something." And you know, no peace, no anything. You can interpret that a lot of ways. I like thinking of the no anything as meaning she's locked up in prison. If you don't follow the rules, you are cut out of the world. Lenore Dove's message is in orange paint. In the Chapter 25 discussion, we talked about the symbolic significance of the varying shades of orange in the series. Peace is a soft sunset orange, fiery rebellion is bright orange, and devastation is burnt orange. That's just my understanding of it. I'm not saying it's a fact. Lenore Dove using bright orange to paint a rebellious message fits within that framework. Haymitch said that she tinted her lips orange for performances, and Maisie said she has orange paint on her fingernails when she shows up to play for the mayor's birthday party. I think Maisie was implying Lenore Dove painted the message and then painted her fingernails in case anyone noticed or asked why she had any paint on her hands or why she had paint with her. It's a socially acceptable explanation. Painting as a hobby wasn't really a thing people could afford to do, and I figure any paint available was meant for walls. She's basically just using the shield of, I'm just a girl. It sounds like Maisie either caught Lenore Dove painting in the alley, or she saw it on her own and then noticed Lenore Dove's nail color and connected the dots. And then maybe she confronted Lenore Dove, and however she reacted was confirmation for what she'd done. The wording is also a little confusing, and it could mean there were just random bits of orange on her fingernails versus a full manicure look. And it sounds like the same orange paint was on the Flint Striker's bird feathers too. Maybe that's how she got the paint, like it'd been Tam Amber's for his blacksmith crafting work, and she swiped it to paint her poster. Let me know if you think Maisie caught Lenore Dove orange-handed or just connected the dots. Another topic on Lenore Dove, what other plans did Snow and the Capitol come up with before deciding on the gumdrop execution? This came up in a Patreon live stream, so thank you to everyone who was there. If Lenore Dove somehow didn't eat the gumdrops, like Haymitch figured out something was off and never fed them to her, I believe the Capitol would execute her another way. They could set up more traps or literally just shoot her down with Haymitch watching. If Snow wanted her dead, it would happen one way or another. But if he didn't want her to die like this, the other main options to punish her and Haymitch would be to make her into an Avox and bring her to the Capitol, or rig the reaping so she is a tribute and Haymitch has to mentor her. I'm losing my voice. Oh no. And then the game makers would make sure the arena is an awful experience and she dies there. Personally, I think making her an Avox is worse than execution. She could be an Avox in Snow's mansion, and he could do anything to her. Don't want to think about that. I can see Snow being very interested in the idea of taking away the voice of this Covey songbird. And it looks like the Capitol version of how Lenore Dove died is that she had appendicitis, which is when an infection causes the appendix to become inflamed and swollen, and if it's not treated quickly, it can burst. If that happens, then the infection spreads and can lead to life-threatening complications, sepsis. So the cover story is basically that Lenore Dove died of sepsis, and Haymitch had sepsis after the games. When he was being treated in the lab, he heard the technician grumbling about him having sepsis. Cool. The symptoms of appendicitis have a lot of overlap with poisoning too. I mean, depending on the type of poison. Common appendicitis symptoms are abdominal pain, nausea, vomiting, and fever. Lenore Dove's poisoning was very quick, but Haymitch had these symptoms when he was poisoned in the arena. I mean, the Capitol really didn't need to prove to anyone how Lenore Dove died. Very few people would need to even be told about it. I'm guessing just people directly working with Haymitch on the tour. Let me know if you can think of any other symbolic significance for appendicitis being the cover-up assigned to her. Since Effie is the one who shared this news, let's talk about Effie. So when she showed up to take Haymitch on tour, she acknowledges the deaths of his family and Lenore Dove and tells the Capitol story of what happened to them. The big question here is, does she actually believe his family had an accident and that Lenore Dove died naturally from appendicitis, or is she saying these details to Haymitch so he knows what he can say about it without getting into any more trouble? Personally, I think Effie's comprehension is muddy. We don't know what Effie actually saw of all of his arena rebel shenanigans, or if she heard about anything, but based on his starved, solitary confinement, she has to understand that he is being punished for something. And I don't think she can ignore this suspicious coincidence that all of his loved ones died shortly after he got home. But overall, Effie is still loyal to the Capitol and the status quo of her upper class life. I think she could effectively lie to herself that their deaths really were an unfortunate twist of fate. And if she's surrounded by people who talk about this Capitol given story of what happened as if it's an undeniable fact, that makes it even easier for her to bury her suspicions. She believes what she wants to believe, and when the Capitol has given her a job as an escort for the games, even if it's for the lowliest district, she would feel grateful. She cares about the reputation of her family, and this is a way for her to improve it, hopefully. I imagine her thinking, Haymitch's loved ones died, and what's done is done, and nothing good will come out of my questioning it. There is a small possibility that Effie fully made this up on the spot, too. She was told about the deaths with no explanation as to what happened. Maybe she got a warning from a Capitol official or Plutarch that Haymitch might be difficult to manage on tour since he recently lost his loved ones. Though I figure an official story would be necessary just for the purposes of any future interviews Haymitch has as a mentor. If Caesar asks him about his life as a victor, Haymitch would need a script to follow that he lives alone in Victor's village. Yes, he had a mother and a brother, but they sadly died in a house fire. No, he doesn't have a sweetheart back home. He had one once, but she got sick. Next up is Drusilla. As Maisley foreshadowed, Drusilla fell and hurt herself in her high heels. Yes! It was on the train to the Capitol, and Drusilla wobbled a bit on her spiked heels when she stood up from a chair, and Maisley said, "Careful, might be time to rethink those boots. Wouldn't something closer to the ground be safer for a person your age?" And then Drusilla slapped her. If ghosts are real in the world of Panem, I choose to believe Maisley's ghost is responsible for Drusilla's fall. Not only does Drusilla fall down from the metaphorical pedestal she puts herself on via the heels, she falls down an escalator, a moving staircase. It's a big fall, and it cost her a job that had just finally helped her raise her social status, being the escort of the second Quarter Quell victor. It's specifically an escalator and not a regular staircase, so it's mobile, like social mobility. She climbed up and then she fell down. The other big staircase in Sunrise is Plutarch's, the spiral golden staircase topped with the eagle. That staircase has been a symbol for the capital district power hierarchy. Plutarch is part of the rebel movement, taking patient steps towards freedom and power. At least that's my current interpretation of it. Let's talk about Plutarch Heavensby. I can hear this one line that Haymitch says to him so clearly when he goes, "How are you here, Plutarch?" I really like it. I don't know. Plutarch's pep talk to Haymitch is big. What he says is important, and I think he truly believes what he's saying, and he also has the agenda to get Haymitch on his side. Plutarch calculates and manipulates and finds the right thing to say to get what he wants, and he's doing that here in District 11. But being calculated and truthful isn't mutually exclusive. Even though Haymitch was not receptive when Plutarch first says this, I think it stuck with him, and he really needed to hear that what he did wasn't for nothing, and he still had more to offer the world. Plutarch said, "Me and the rebels want you. What you did in the arena was important. The way you think is important, and you are part of something so much bigger than you realize." Plutarch's confidence that the Capitol will fall eventually isn't necessarily based on hope or optimism. It's a matter of knowing that history repeats itself. Plutarch had access to tons of books. He knew about ancient Rome and had to have read about the rise and fall of empires across human history. He knows that nobody stays on top forever. In Mockingjay, he tells Katniss about the meaning of Panem et Circenses, that it's a phrase about a place called Rome, and the Capitol operates under this principle. Later, after the war was won, he's on a hovercraft with Katniss and Haymitch and says, "Now we're in that sweet period where everyone agrees that our recent horrors should never be repeated." But collective thinking is usually short-lived. We're fickle, stupid beings with poor memories and a great gift for self-destruction. Although, who knows? Maybe this will be it. The time it sticks. Maybe we are witnessing the evolution of the human race. So that's Plutarch's perspective 25 years after the 50th Games. And I imagine he felt this way back then too. Plutarch seemed pretty happy after the war. He was appointed Secretary of Communications, which means he sets the programming for the airwaves. I see Plutarch's motivation for taking part in the rebellion as because he values fairness and security. Snow was not fair, and with Snow in power, nobody is safe. Anyone can be killed at any time if Snow says so. And Plutarch is ambitious. He doesn't want to have his accomplishments taken away. He doesn't want a ceiling on his accomplishments either. He wants to be able to reach his full potential without someone killing him off because they see him as a threat. I also think Plutarch was sort of bored by the status quo, and taking part of the rebellion is exciting, and if he pulls it off, that's a huge accomplishment. He selfishly wants to make history and be known for changing the world. There's a detached quality to him, like he's always observing the world from afar versus being in it. Makes sense as someone who likes to be behind the camera. His parting conversation with Haymitch in Sunrise affirms that he doesn't see himself as a savior or even good, but he's doing everything he can to keep the rebellion alive. He's doing what he needs to do in order to stay alive so he can support this cause long term. He does refer to it as a game though. There's that detachment. I go back and forth about whether I'm being too generous or too cynical about Plutarch's intentions. It's tricky. He seems to know who he is though. He's a dialectical thinker. He sees things from both sides. It looks like Plutarch never married, or if he did, they were out of the picture by Mockingjay. I got the impression he was the last Heavensbee standing. He mentions great-grandparents, but not his parents at the time of sunrise. He doesn't say anything about siblings or relationships. Seems like a solitary guy. Being a loner is beneficial for him, so there aren't people that can be used against him. He even told Haymitch that having nothing to lose puts him in a position of power. I don't know, I get the vibe that Plutarch doesn't feel a need for close relationships, platonic or romantic. Next up is Beetee. Just gotta let that sink in that his wife was alive and pregnant after the 50th games, and in the trilogy, there's not a word about his family. I don't want to know how, but his wife and baby must have been executed in a way to punish him at some point. There is the possibility they died naturally, but maybe they were alive up until the 75th games, and when the rebels broke the arena, the Capitol killed what remained of Beetee's family. It does make some sense for the Capitol to keep his family around in order to control him. As Plutarch said, Beetee's too valuable to kill. The Capitol needed him to keep inventing stuff, so they could just threaten his family if he didn't do whatever they said. And they could threaten that if he takes his own life, they'll execute his family anyway. That sounds about right for the Capitol. So yeah, I think that his wife and new child were allowed to live, and then they were executed either shortly before the 75th games or shortly after it all got blown up. Beetee was a huge part of the rebel plan, and he would understand that his family's lives were at risk, so maybe they were already dead, or he decided the rebel plan was worth it. Beetee was all in on the rebellion in 13, and he helped create the double bombs that killed Prim. It's an extreme weapon that targets civilians and first responders, and I can see how Beetee would be on board with that after everything the Capitol did to his family. He wants revenge. It doesn't make it right, but his radicalization tracks. He did still vote no on a Capitol Children Hunger Games, though. He knows what it's like to be a tribute and a parent to a tribute. Knows it's not fun. It's time for symbols and themes. So the Raven has the most thematic weight here, and there's a ton to discuss. I'm going to start by covering the very few other symbolic elements, and then we'll get into the nevermore of it all. So there's Haymitch dog comparisons. In this chapter, Haymitch describes himself as being like a stray dog, wandering around the Covey's house and curling up on the ground. He really is like a stray. He has no more family, and the building that was his home burned to the ground. Haymitch described a lot of things in dog terms, but here's the other times in the book he referred to himself this way. He said the Capitol people were betting on him like a starved dog in a fight, and then feeding him by hand like you would a pet dog. So he went from a desperate fighting dog to a domesticated pet, and then to a cast out stray. Pretty solid thread. Next up is the Flint Striker. So let's delve into the significance of Haymitch burying this in front of Lenore Dove's headstone. I mean, obviously she gave it to him. It was the last physical gift she ever gave him. It was a birthday gift. And right before Lenore Dove gave him the Flint Striker, they were literally talking about, if Haymitch could imagine the sun rising on a world without a reaping. Something that he used to fight back against the Capitol, and then she was executed for his actions. Haymitch asks for her forgiveness for all the ways in which he failed before burying the Striker. He wants Lenore Dove to let him off the hook for his promise to bring down the games, giving her back the physical gift along with his apology. He wants to bury everything that happened in the games and his links to the rebellion, and her spirit or fate rejects that. Instead of a sign that he can give up and die, he sees Lenore Dove's spray-painted poster to stop the games. The true actual events of Haymitch's games were buried and removed from the public record, and he keeps that knowledge to himself until after the war when he tells Katniss and Peeta. So burying the Flint Striker could be a metaphor of you can hide from the past, but it doesn't erase it. You can take away the Flint Striker, but not the memory. Nothing you can take from me was ever worth keeping. At the end of the chapter, Haymitch laments that he has no mementos of his loved ones. They're all burned or buried, but the burial was his choice. He could have kept the flint striker as his Lenore Dove memento, and he buries it in the hope that it will help him forget her and the ache of loss, which is very sad. Okay, those are the only other symbols I have, so now for the Raven. I'm going over the placement of the verses of the poem in the chapter and how it all connects narratively to Haymitch. I researched the common accepted meaning of the Raven to help me with this. Old English, especially poetry in Old English, is not my strong suit, and when I first read Sunrise and saw all of this Poe, I was not happy. I appreciate it a lot more now that I'm forcing myself to take the time to properly analyze it, but it doesn't come easy for me. I'm trying my best, and I will be outsourcing info and linking it. In this chapter, the first 2 verses are after Tam Amber says, "Not again." It's the beginning of the poem, like the beginning of this chapter of Haymitch's life. Misery over the loss of his family, and Lenore Dove. In the poem, there's knocking at the narrator's door that he ignores, and he had once wished for the next day, for the future, and now he looks to the past, thinking of the lost Lenore. After these verses, Haymitch reflects on them. He says the Raven is this relentless reminder that President Snow has stolen the people he loved and has made it impossible for him to love again, since anything he loves will be taken away eventually. There's an interesting wording link. President Snow's crystal clear message to me on my homecoming, and the only other time crystal clear appears in the book is chapter 15, shortly before Haymitch drinks from the poison stream in the arena. Streams burbling with crystal clear water abound. Poison water, poison gumdrops. Nothing beautiful or good can be trusted. Danger is always lurking. The next section of the poem comes after Haymitch says he pushed away everyone in his life and threw the rocks at Astrid and Burdock, driving away those friends who come rapping at his chamber door until they stop trying to reach him. In the poem, there's purple curtains rustling, filling the narrator with new terror. Purple is a color of wealth, which fits with Haymitch's victor status, drawing the curtains at his windows, blocking everyone out. In the poem, the narrator is trying to calm himself by repeating that the sound of the rustling curtains is just a visitor trying to get in the door. And then the narrator asks the visitor to forgive him, but he had been napping and he didn't hear them knocking. And then he opens the door, finding darkness there and nothing more, which is the end of the verse. The next line from Haymitch is, "The world goes silent. I see no one. Dark, silent nothingness." The narrator's napping. It's like Haymitch with the sleep syrup. And the poem says sir or madam, so a man and a woman like Burdock and Astrid. And both Haymitch and the narrator find nobody at the door now. The word entreating, meaning to ask someone earnestly or anxiously to do something, is used twice in this section of the poem. It's the visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door. And the only other time that word appears is later in this chapter when Haymitch is looking for Lenore Dove's grave, entreating the Mockingjays for a clue to her whereabouts. So the Raven entreated him, and he entreated the Mockingjays. The next verse picks up after the epic line, "I drained the bottles of sleep syrup to escape reality, only to feed her gumdrops in my dreams." So this verse has the narrator standing in the darkness with that open door, afraid, doubting himself, and dreaming dreams no mortal ever dared to dream before. He keeps saying and hearing Lenore, and then he goes back inside and hears the tapping on the window and wants to figure out what it is, but tells himself it's just the wind. After this passage of the poem ends, Haymitch goes out at night looking for Lenore Dove's grave in the cemetery, but can't find her. Haymitch goes to her house and lays beneath her window, yearning for her ghost to find him. The elusive ghost tapping at the window. And then Clerk Carmine starts playing the melody of the Raven on the fiddle, and Haymitch freaks out and he's pounding on the cubby's door. All feels pretty in line with the poem verse. Right after that moment with the fiddle is the next couple of verses, and the narrator opens the window and the Raven steps in and perches on a small statue of Pallas, aka the goddess of wisdom, Athena. So the symbol of his grief is sitting on wisdom. You could see grief is clouding his judgment, preventing him from gaining wisdom, or that it's tied to it, like he'll learn from this grief. The narrator is sort of amused by the Raven and talks to it, asking its name, and it says, "Nevermore." So the narrator, when faced with grief, tries to skirt around it, mocking it with overly formal language, but the Raven shuts it down. Haymitch's sarcasm can't make the grief disappear. There's the phrase Night's Plutonian shore here, meaning the underworld or hell. Death has claimed Haymitch's loved ones and he can't reach them. In ancient Greek and Roman mythology, Pluton or Pluto is the ruler of the underworld. This is different from Hades somehow. There's so many layers to the mythology here and I'm not qualified to go over it, so I'm keeping it super surface level. I thought at first this could relate to Plutarch's name, but the roots of the name aren't the same. The poem gets stuck in Haymitch's head again after he hears Clerk Carmine's fiddle and he thinks the earworm has awoken. We heard earworm earlier. Haymitch said Lenore Dove described this poem as an earworm, and Haymitch calls Maisley's Ladybug song an earworm. Little link there. I lost the rhymes. Oh god. The next time we see lines from the poem are the ones that are on Lenore Dove's gravestone, and this goes back several verses to being in the dark, unrelenting silence, and the narrator whispering Lenore and hearing it echoed back. Clerk Carmine and Tam Amber chose these lines from her name poem. They could have had a line about her being a rare and radiant maiden, but no, they chose lines highlighting the void that losing her left behind. The word token is on the grave too. The stillness gave no token, as in no tangible physical thing outside the door. So it's not the same thing as a token for the games, but Lenore Dove gave Haymitch the flint striker that ended up being his token, and then he buried it with her. The poem picks up again after Haymitch goes home and falls asleep back into the gumdrop nightmare. In the passage, the narrator is surprised at the raven talking and saying nevermore, and that he's experiencing something that nobody else ever has. He's meeting a physical embodiment of his grief. He will nevermore be with his Lenore in the land of the living. The narrator says that the raven will leave him like everybody else has, and again it responds nevermore, making the point that his loss and grief will be with him forever. It will not leave. The next verse of the poem picks up after Haymitch finds that message in the alley, and in the poem the narrator reacts to the raven saying nevermore again, thinking it's just the only word it knows and it learned it from its master who said it often maybe. The narrator is trying to distance himself from the idea of feeling this grief forever, and then he moves to sit in front of the raven and try to figure out what nevermore means. So an interesting little link here is that the narrator's seat cushion is velvet, and later in the chapter when Haymitch is on the train for the victory tour, he notices dove-colored velvet upholstery. Lenore Dove is everywhere. After these verses, Haymitch's nightmares worsen. Now he's being chased by careers. And then he preps for the victory tour, and the last line before the next verse starts is, Effie does her best to keep me sober, but the train's loaded with booze. In this part of the poem, the narrator is trying to come up with theories to explain what the raven's deal is. He feels exposed and seen by its fiery eyes, and he's still sitting in the violet velvet chair. The way the cushion gleams in the lamplight makes him crash out even more because he knows his lost Lenore will never get to touch the cushion again. And then the narrator imagines perfumed air from angels and thinks it's a message to forget Lenore. It smells like Nepenthe, a potion to make him forget his grief and sadness, but he won't be able to. Nevermore. And Haymitch's Nepenthe is any sort of alcohol he can get his hands on. Plutarch had Nepenthe plants in an imitation Nepenthe drink at his house. Haymitch quoted a line from the Raven about the Nepenthe at the time, and he understands that part of the poem as the narrator trying to stop thinking about how he lost his true love, and thinks the important part is it makes you forget terrible things. That all tracks with his current circumstances. After this section of the poem in chapter 27, Haymitch quotes the poem again in front of Plutarch, muttering into his bottle, respite and Nepenthe. The poem picks up again after Plutarch somewhat sarcastically tells Haymitch to let him know if he can think of another way to stop that sunrise on the reaping besides a bloody war. And in the poem, the narrator is screaming at the raven, calling it evil, asking why it's here, and the raven is unbothered. The narrator hates his home and asks if it's possible for good things in his future, and the raven says, nevermore. Overall, it's just the narrator feeling more and more desperate and trapped in grief. After these verses, Haymitch continues the victory tour in misery, ending back in the birdcage in the capital. At least I'm pretty sure it's the birdcage. He says, in the capital where I'm returned to my comfy cage. Could also mean the apartment. But once he's back in 12, he talks to Plutarch again, saying how he has nothing to live for, and he's like the narrator, feeling worse and worse. The narrator is still screaming at the bird. He wants it to leave, and he wants all remnants of it erased from his chamber. He wants to live in his loneliness, unbothered, and with the hope that living in solitude will be lonely, but less painful. But the raven isn't going anywhere, and it's not shutting up. It remains sitting on the statue with its demon-like eyes and its shadow trapping the narrator's soul forever. And Haymitch affirms this with the line following the end of the poem, "And so I remain forever trapped in my chamber." He's desperate for relief, like the narrator. He isolates himself, drinking to escape the grief and pain. Haymitch refers to the liquor he buys as Nepenthe and thinks how the morning of the 50th reaping was when that raven first tapped on his chamber door. He's not calling Sid the raven, just that Sid woke him up on that day. Sid was his rooster, ushering in the day when the raven arrived. Haymitch sees that day as the beginning of his woes, though it's not the first time he experienced loss. His father died, and his twin sisters, and his grandma. So perhaps Woodbine Chance being shot at the reaping could be the first tap from the raven. It might not be that specific, though. It's just more like his 16th birthday, the day of the reaping, was the day that changed the trajectory of his life and opened the door for all of this grief. A day where the first word he heard was happy. I found an awesome video analyzing the raven in Sunrise on the Reaping by Parker Hall, and I linked it. Highly recommend watching it. Everything I'm saying in this last bit about the poem comes from Parker's video, so credit goes to them. So having quotations in a poem is meant to mean this really happened, like someone actually said this in real life. And the quotations are a few things that the narrator says out loud, and the raven saying nevermore. So having this element of quotation marks contrasts with the other parts of the poem, signaling that you should question if this really happened. It gives you 3 ways to distrust the narrator. It starts with him falling asleep, so maybe he's dreaming these events. The second is that he's recalling this as a memory from the past, telling it to someone, so maybe he made up the story or his memories are inaccurate. And because this is a ballad which has supernatural elements, the reader needs to question if the supernatural stuff is truly happening in the story because it fits the genre, or if you're being misled. So the reader has to deal with the conflicting messages that this is real because of quotation marks, but what's happening in the poem makes it seem like it isn't real. It gives the reader a similar experience as the narrator, questioning reality.
Real or not real?
Also, the big takeaway from the poem is that trying to understand the unknowable just leads to madness. The narrator wants an answer to the question of if he'll be with his love again, which is impossible to know as a living person. Next point, Haymitch gave up all hope like the narrator until Katniss came along. He stops being like the narrator by finding purpose in life via the rebellion and allowing love into his life. He comes to think of Katniss and Peeta as his family, and this stops him from joining Lenore Dove early. He sticks around for them. Even though the world doesn't quite make sense, he doesn't have all the answers, he can still find a life worth living. Apparently, Poe intended for The Raven to be a famous, extremely sad poem about something beautiful. He believed someone grieving the death of a beautiful woman is the most effective topic for this. And his plan worked. This poem really popped off, obviously. So Suzanne intended to make Haymitch's backstory the saddest thing ever, too. Therefore, The Raven. Haymitch grieves a beautiful girl, and then Suzanne Collins makes it even sadder by piling on the guilt of Haymitch feeding his love the poison that kills her, right when they almost seem to get their happy ending. And their reunion makes what happens with Lenore Dove feel so much more devastating than Ma and Sid's death in the fire. Like the romantic tragedy of losing the beautiful girl just hits different. The devotion of the narrator and Haymitch to their lost loves is the key. Having Haymitch never move on from Lenore Dove makes it even sadder. We're adding dimension to him, and it makes the reader love him more because we all want someone to desperately yearn for us, right? We love to love a sad, self-tortured man. Okay, that's all I have for The Raven. Now it is time for lore and world building. Victor Services. Haymitch receives money and groceries weekly dropped off by a peacekeeper. There's Snow's diet of bread and milk, but there's other stuff too. And they're ordinary enough foods that I wouldn't say the bread and milk are a taunting message from Snow. But in regards to the Victor winnings, I don't think there's a bank in District 12. People just have cash. I guess all Victors receive weekly payments, at least at the time of of the 50th games, but the grocery delivery might not be a thing for everyone. Haymitch thinks Snow arranged the service, which maybe. The houses in Victor's village have telephones, so a Victor could talk about this with their escort, who is their main liaison with the capital. And I can totally picture Effie setting this up for Haymitch, partly out of genuine care, but also as part of her job of having him fed and healthy and presentable for the cameras. Or this could be Plutarch's doing. Maybe the peacekeeper making the deliveries is Plutarch's friend in 12. The downside of this service is that it's isolating. It takes away a reason for Haymitch to go to town and interact with people. In the trilogy, victors are still paid, but the envelope of money isn't mentioned, so it could be a thing or not. Maybe it's a monthly payment, which is sort of suggested by Peeta's declaration in District 11 to give 1 month's worth of Katniss and Peeta's winnings every year to ruin Thresh's families. But you'd think it'd be kind of dangerous for the victors to have all this cash in their house. The victors are paid more than they can reasonably spend, at least according to Katniss. So do they just end up with mountains of cash in their home? Do people try to rob them? Their houses are bugged, so it'd be pretty risky. But I could see Peeta as sort of having this set up in his house that people can easily break in and take his money, or he has a shed where it's kind of a not so secret that yeah, if you go to the shed behind Peeta Mellark's house in Victor's village, there's usually some money there that you can take. Or I don't know, it's tricky. They're being watched heavily. Are there banks or not? Do they have piles of cash sitting in their house? Do they bury it like gold bricks? Questions. Some lore on the Victor trains. We know that fancy first-class trains were used on the Victory Tour at least since the 50th Hunger Games now. When Haymitch was a tribute, it was basic and utilitarian, and then Haymitch describes the Victory Tour train as fancier, lots of steel and chrome, dove-colored velvet upholstery. I figure there were renovations in the 24 years before Katniss and Peeta were tributes, but they had the same type of trains as tributes as they did as victors. They had private suites, polished paneled walls, and they were overall very grand. In terms of the Victory Tour, overall the format is the same in the 50th as it is in the 74th. The victor goes to each district, stands on the steps of the Justice Building, sees the families of the tributes, and there are parties at night, and it all ends at a big party in the capital. Time for possible foreshadowing. Isolation. Little thing, but Haymitch's isolation in the apartment in the capital, his solitary confinement after winning, could foreshadow his experience in his victor's village home for the following decades. As a last person alive in the arena, that solitary existence follows him home. Next bit is Old Bascom Pie's Rot Gut. Haymitch starts buying this cheap liquor in the last chapter of the book, and in the first chapter, he mentioned it. He was describing how Woodbine and the other Chance boys get so wild when they drink that Hattie won't sell them white liquor for fear it will bring down the peacekeepers. So they have to buy it from Old Bascom Pie, who has no scruples and sells Rot Gut to anyone with enough coin. Haymitch wasn't a drinker at all before his games, and then
The refreshments.
he replaced Woodbine Chance as tribute, and then he goes on to drink Rot Gut like him too. Rot Gut is a real term for poor quality liquor, and it goes sort of perfect with Haymitch's experience of being literally gutted in the games. He gets this huge scar across his gut, and then he fills his stomach with Rot Gut. I looked into this Bascom Pie name, and Bascom may come from words meaning marshy, swampy, or valley overgrown with spiky plants. And I think pie means the food pie, so swamp pie. Plutarch's speech in District 11 foreshadowed Katniss and 13's army. This one's pretty straightforward. Plutarch says the rebellion needs someone exactly like Haymitch that's luckier or with better timing. This ends up being Katniss Everdeen. And Plutarch says it'd be helpful to have an army at their back. It'd be easier to find an army than build one. And they found an army in District 13 and they built it up, training civilians to fight in the rebellion. They did both. Plutarch tells Haymitch there doesn't seem to be a way to bring down Snow without people killing each other. So a war is the plan, and that plan comes to fruition. That's it for possible foreshadowing. And now for series connections. CPR. The fact that Clerk Carmine knows how to do CPR or a version of it piqued my interest. He did grow up going to the lake in the woods, so knowing CPR would be important for swimming. But part of Haymitch's flashback dream is Clerk Carmine trying to restart Lenore Dove's heart while he calls her name. As far as we know, he grew up in the orphaned group of the remaining Covey, and he's not a healer, but he learned how to do this somehow. Perhaps the Covey already knew how to do this, or an older Covey member did and taught him, or maybe CPR was more commonly taught during Haymitch's era, because by the time Katniss is in the picture, it sounds like most people do not know how to do this. When she realized Finnick was attempting to restart Peeta's heart after he hit the force field, she narrated, "Once in a blue moon, I've seen my mother try something similar, but not often. If your heart fails in District 12, it's unlikely your family could get you to my mother in time anyway." This implies that people in 12 did not know how to perform CPR, or possibly even know that it existed, and instead would rely on getting someone to a healer to help instead of attempting it themselves. Next are clinking bottles. Small one, but Haymitch loaded a sack with bottles of rotgut, clinking all the way home. And in Mockingjay, when he and Katniss go home to 12 at the very end, he tells her he'll see her tomorrow, and Katniss narrates, "As the clinking of his bag of liquor bottles fades away, I whisper, I doubt it." Haymitch is clinking all the way home. Next connection is wandering and waking. The way Haymitch gets drunk, passes out, and wakes up in random places reminds me of Katniss in Mockingjay in District 13, and then in the presidential mansion in the time between the end of the war and Snow's execution. She felt a frenzied need to hide in various places in 13, like supply closets. In the mansion, she hides in a bathtub and closets and a wardrobe, and she takes a morphling tablet to knock her out in there. It's like Haymitch getting drunk and hiding out in random places. Katniss tucks herself away more, and Haymitch is just kind of out in the open, but it's this compulsion to wander and try to escape. Next is condemnation. There's plenty of uses of the word condemn in the series, but I'm going to focus on 3 times that it's used. So in this chapter, when Haymitch processes Lenore Dove's message, narrating, and it says, "You promised me." With that, she condemns me to life. Love that ironic word choice, because normally you're condemned to some sort of criminal sentence or death. It's a punishing word. Living does feel like a punishment to our sweet buddy Haymitch. In chapter 1 of this book, Haymitch said that Lenore Dove calls the meadow the friend of the condemned because it can hide you from peacekeepers. And then she's executed in the meadow she thought of as a safe haven from Capitol Rule. So she was condemned to die in the meadow that betrayed her, and she condemned Haymitch to stay alive to avenge her death. There's also the argument that this friend of the condemned comment is a clue that Lucy Gray survived and hid in the meadow. Just acknowledging that here. We can add it to the list of clues about her fate. Also in chapter 5, when the tributes arrived in the capital, Haymitch thought about Lenore Dove's view on the meadow again. Since the peacekeepers didn't feel the need to put District 12 in chains, since they didn't deem them capable of fighting or running away, Haymitch does consider taking this opportunity for a moment before thinking, but where can an escaped tribute find protection in the capital? I think of the smoky mist in my mountains, Lenore Dove's friend of the condemned, and see no equivalent here. So I just stand here like the puny long shot I am, taking in the banners that deck the station. No peace, no prosperity, no Hunger Games, no peace. The same sort of propaganda that Lenore Dove mocks in her message. No place is safe in Panem while the capital is in power. In Ballad, there's another condemnation to life line. It's in chapter 2 when Coriolanus is crashing out about being assigned Lucy Gray as his tribute and the possibility of not being able to afford university. He has the revelation that Dean Highbottom detested him enough to kill his prize chances and condemn him to live a life in the districts. Everyone knew what happened if you went to the districts. You are written off, forgotten. In the eyes of the capital, you were basically dead. So Coriolanus equates being assigned a Covey girl from 12 to a condemnation of a doomed existence in the districts. Cool stuff. Next are nightmares of the games. This isn't very deep, just acknowledging how Haymitch has nightmares about the games and the other tributes, and so did Katniss and Peeta, and any other survivors of the games, really. Haymitch's nightmares compel him to start sleeping with a knife, and he continues doing this through the trilogy. In Sunrise, when Effie wakes him up the first morning of the Victory Tour, he startles and realizes she's taken possession of his knife. And in Catching Fire, Katniss wakes him up the first morning of the tour and narrates, Haymitch jumps up, kicking his chair 10 feet behind him and wielding a knife. I forgot he always sleeps with one clutched in his hand. I'm impressed with Effie for noticing and handling the knife back in the day. Effie made Haymitch drink coffee that morning, and Katniss brewed him a strong pot. And then Peeta used the knife that Haymitch slept with to slice bread for him, and he cleaned it in white liquor. Katniss tells Haymitch to take a bath before she leaves, and of course, Effie sent him to the tub 24 years earlier. These are the only 2 times Haymitch went on a Victory Tour. The other years, he would just be part of the hosting party in District 12. So the District 11 attic, the mystery of Haymitch knowing about this secret spot of the Justice Building of 11 has been solved. Plutarch is the one who showed it to him, and Haymitch stored that information away and brought Katniss and Peeta up there for another clandestine meeting on their tour. The attic is the only spot in the entire Justice Building that isn't bugged. Plutarch has all sorts of connections, so it's not surprising to me that he knows about this attic. Maybe it's an established rebel meeting spot. As far as we know, Haymitch only ever had reason to be in District 11 on these 2 Victory Tours. And I've seen some critiques that it doesn't make sense that Haymitch would be able to remember this complicated route to the attic from going in there one time when he was intoxicated, which is fair. He wasn't blackout drunk though, so I say it's plausible he was able to remember how to get there. It's also possible before the Victory Tour that Haymitch's Victor friend from 11 Chaff or Plutarch covertly reminded him that there's a safe space to talk in this attic, and they gave him directions. The route to the attic, according to Haymitch in Sunrise, is up multiple stairways and into the attic. And the place looks like it hasn't been disturbed in 100 years. There's a coat of dust so thick you could sleep comfortably on it, which is much shorter than Katniss's description. She narrates, as far as I know, Haymitch has only been here once when he was on his Victory Tour decades ago, but he must have a remarkable memory or reliable instincts because he leads us up through a maze of twisting staircases and increasingly narrow halls. At times, he has to stop and force a door. By the protesting squeak of the hinges, you can tell it's been a long time since it was opened. Eventually, we climb a ladder to a trap door. When Haymitch pushes it aside, we find ourselves in the dome of the Justice Building. I mean, it has to be the same place as the attic, and the way it's retconned for Sunrise doesn't really help the plot armor accusations. It's a very complicated route in Catching Fire, and then in Sunrise it sounds like no big deal. I don't really mind this. I mean, it's cool though that in Catching Fire we learned that you have to climb a ladder to a trap door, and then Haymitch went up and down the Mutt portal trapdoor in the arena on a ladder, doing the water tank plan. There's a little Peeta Haymitch parallel. So after the tour, when Haymitch comes home, he goes, I have nothing to live for. I say this without even a note of self-pity. I am simply stating a fact. Which reminds me of Peeta talking to Katniss on the beach in the 75th Games. He told Katniss that if she died and he lived, there's no life for him at all back in District 12. And later, no one really needs me, he says, and there's no self-pity in his voice. Similar sentiments, especially the way they both say it without self-pity. And now for notable quotes. Let's see if there's any left that I haven't already said. So this one makes it in my top 10 most devastating lines, but only if you have the context. And I don't check the bag. I never check the bag. Why can't I remember to check the bag? This echoes in my head way too often. Next quote, trying to forget is my full-time job now. Ouch. This next quote also hurts. Surprise! The world goes silent. I see no one. I have never really been alone before. Always with my family, or my friends, or my love. Next quote is Haymitch talking to Plutarch. I am living proof that the Capitol always wins. I tried to keep that sun from rising on another reaping day. I tried to change things, and now everybody's dead. You don't want me. Living proof that the Capitol always wins. Gosh, Haymitch. That is it for chapter 27. and all we have left is the short and sweet epilogue. Aside from the recap, the analysis for the epilogue is freeform instead of the usual separate sections. It just felt awkward breaking it down like that. I did try my best to summarize it, but I love the way it's written, so I'm reading a lot of it verbatim, and I won't apologize for it. Epilogue. Recap. This takes place post-trilogy, after the war is won, the games are over, and Haymitch, Katniss, and Peeta are all making new lives for themselves in 12. Haymitch still dreams of Lenore Dove, and he envisions her growing older alongside him. Haymitch narrates, "I fulfilled my promise about the reaping, or at least lent a hand, but Lenore Dove says I can't come to her yet. I have to look after my family. Try not to cry challenge, impossible. I first saw the girl at the Hob when she was just a baby." The first time I read that, I nearly threw the book across the room like it burned my hand. After going through this painful story and then getting this little reunion with Katniss and Peeta, like just getting to say hi to them, I just see them in this safe glow in the epilogue. So thank you for that, Suzanne. Okay, back to Haymitch's narration. "I first saw the girl at the Hob when she was just a baby. Burdock was so proud of her. He toted her around everywhere. After he died in that mine explosion, she started coming alone, trading the odd squirrel or rabbit. Tough and smart, her hair in 2 braids then, reminding me for all the world of Llewellyn McCoy, my sweetheart of old. And after she volunteered for the games, that nickname couldn't help but slip out. I didn't want to let them in, her and Peeta, but the walls of a person's heart are not impregnable, not if they have ever known love. That's what Lenore Dove says anyway." Shut up. Then Haymitch mentions the book Katniss and Peeta started to hold on to the memories of everyone that they lost. At first, Haymitch was not interested in participating since it was too painful, but when Burdock's page came up, he had to mention how he showed Haymitch Lenore Dove's grave. And he couldn't help himself from telling them about Maisie Donner, former owner of the Mockingjay pin, and how Sid loved the stars. And then they all came tumbling out. Family, tributes, friends, comrades in arms, everybody, even his love. He finally told their story. Imagining Haymitch telling Katniss stories about her father and then telling Peeta how Burdock saved his father at the reaping. You know, he like hit him in the back of the knee so he'd get out of the line of fire. Shortly after Haymitch told Katniss and Peeta about Lenore Dove, Katniss brought him a basket of goose eggs. And then there's dialogue from Katniss. She tells Haymitch not to eat, to hatch. I raided a few different nests so they can breed all right. And Haymitch narrates, never mind that we had roast goose for dinner. She's just shooting Mother Goose and stealing her eggs and giving them as a gift. Then Haymitch narrates this about Katniss. She's not an easy person. She's like me, Peeta always says. But she was smarter than me, or luckier. She's the one who finally kept that sun from rising. Peeta built an incubator for the eggs the geese imprinted on Haymitch when they hatched. He takes the geese to the meadow. Lenore Dove likes it best there, and Haymitch is content where she's content. Like the geese, they really did mate for life. Haymitch thinks his time is coming. He won't be here in the old there before much longer because of liver damage. He's only sober when he's out of booze, though he drinks differently these days, less to forget, more out of habit. He's at peace with dying. It'll happen when it happens. Haymitch narrates, the Capitol can never take Lenore Dove from me again. They never really did in the first place. Nothing you can take from me was ever worth keeping, and she is the most precious thing I've ever known. When I tell her that, she always says, I love you like Allfire. And I reply, I love you like Allfire too. The end. Here's the closing lines from the other epilogues to compare. In Mockingjay, it's, I'll tell them how I survive it. I'll tell them that on bad mornings, it feels impossible to take pleasure in anything because I'm afraid it could be taken away. That's when I make a list in my head of every act of goodness I've seen someone do. It's like a game, repetitive, even a little tedious after more than 20 years. But there are much worse games to play. The final lines in Ballad are, although he couldn't help hoping that as the dean drew his final breath, he'd realize what so many others had realized when they challenged him. What all of Panem would know one day, what was inevitable, snow lands on top. So for the trilogy, it's basically, I survived the worst. For Ballad, it's, I'm going to rule the world. And Sunrise is, I love you and you love me. Survival, power, and love. That's it for the recap. Now for the rest of the epilogue discussion. First of all, the emotional impact of the lines. I first saw the girl at the Hob when she was just a baby. Burdock was so proud of her. He toted her around everywhere. Burdock was so proud of her. Please tell me I'm not the only person who is so overwhelmed that they feel physically ill over this. What the
Peeta!
The concept of Haymitch seeing Burdock hold Katniss as a baby with a huge smile on his face, and he's introducing her to people, and like he's making her wave her little hand in the Hob. And Haymitch's first memories of Luella is so much like his first memory of Katniss. He first met Luella on the day she was born when Mr. McCoy, his face alight with joy, held her up at the window for all us kids to see. I think they were at school or something, but he was a proud dad like Burdock. So Haymitch saw Katniss as she grew up with full awareness of who she was. He'd go to the Hob to buy his liquor and odds and ends, but he'd be there and he'd glimpse Katniss and he couldn't help but notice her. She's wearing her father's hunting jacket, and he knew when Burdock died. Their friendship had been over for about 20 years at that point, since Katniss was 11 when he died, and she was born the year of the 58th games. I think I'm doing my math correctly. We know Haymitch did not do anything to help the Everdeens after Burdock died. I mean, there were plenty of people in 12 who needed more food and money at all times, but victors can't just brazenly go around sharing their wealth. The Capitol does not want that. Katniss does mention making an effort to make her rounds to the hungry and giving away food, and she tried to spread around her wealth with her purchases. Astrid also didn't charge her patients once Katniss was a victor, so they're able to be generous in some capacity. Haymitch is just so terrified to form relationships with anybody because he doesn't want the Capitol to use them against him. Theoretically, if he noticed the Everdeens were starving after Burdock died, he could get away with sneaking them some food or money, at least once, probably, but we don't know how aware he was of their situation, or if he felt it was worth the risk, or if he just thought it was all hopeless anyway. Astrid's depression was kept hidden, so it's not like he'd know about that. Haymitch's own mother was able to keep the family going as a single parent, so he knows it's possible. He could have had faith in Astrid, and that Burdock would have taught his daughters enough that they'd figure it out. And Katniss did manage, but she was very close to starving to death before things clicked into place. Anyway, based on the epilogue, Haymitch saw Katniss rise to the occasion after her father died. We have to acknowledge that Haymitch used the description of Katniss's hair in 2 braids then to describe her when she's young, and when Peeta told Katniss about his crush on her, he said her hair was in 2 braids instead of 1. And Haymitch could see and hear Peeta say that when they were in the cave. I have something critical to say here. Please don't yell at me. But I don't love Haymitch's whole aging ghost memory of Lenore Dove thing. It didn't quite land for me. I don't know. It's sweet, and it would feel weird if he longs for a teenage girl his whole life, so I get why it makes sense to age his mental image of her so it feels less creepy, and he feels her soul with him always. Like, I can get behind that, like feeling your lost ones stay with you. Sunrise and Ballad have a lot more of these spiritual afterlife elements than the trilogy. There's fate and soulmate type stuff in the trilogy, which I'm really into, but the ghost memory stuff with Lenore Dove is just not my favorite. If in the movie they show an aged version of Lenore Dove that Haymitch sees reflected in the mirror or something, I fear I'll find it awkward and cheesy. We'll see. And I struggle a bit with thinking of adult trilogy era Haymitch having this deep spiritual connection to his girlfriend of yore. It's a part of himself he would keep hidden in private, but I still had a tough time merging the trilogy Haymitch with the version of him that has sweet conversations with ghosts. Let me know how this landed for you. Next point, I cannot get over Haymitch referring to Katniss and Peeta as his family, and the sweetheart nickname because Katniss reminds Haymitch of Luella. I can't. There's a quote from chapter 27 and one from the epilogue that line up. So Haymitch thinks how Burdock pities him, perhaps because he knows what it is to love. And Haymitch's walls came down enough for him to let Katniss and Peeta into his life because the walls of a person's heart are not impregnable, not if they have ever known love. Knowing and experiencing love being this access point of human connection. It's really sweet. And this drives Burdock to show Haymitch to Lenore Dove's grave, completing the loop of him leading him to her when they were children. They went into the woods to pick apples and found Lenore Dove in the tree. When Haymitch is heading to the graveyard, he narrates, "And I do want her. Just as long ago I wanted the apples he promised, and so I follow him far, far into the woods." Let's get into the crossover between this epilogue and the ending of Mockingjay. Before I get into the specific connections, here's a brief summary of the last few pages of Mockingjay. Katniss, Peeta, Haymitch, and Buttercup are all rebuilding their lives in 12. Katniss has therapy over the phone and gets the idea to make a memory book in a similar style to her family's plant book. The entries in the memory book have a picture, either a photo or a painting of a specific person. Peeta draws the pictures as needed, and Katniss writes important details about them. At first, she and Peeta work on it together, and then Haymitch finally joins, contributing 23 years of tributes he was forced to mentor. Katniss narrates, "Peeta bakes, I hunt, Haymitch drinks until the liquor runs out, and then raises geese until the next train arrives. Fortunately, the geese can take pretty good care of themselves. More people come back to 12 to rebuild. Katniss and Peeta grow back together, of course. They admit their love for each other. The Sunrise epilogue ends with a love exchange, too, between Haymitch and the spirit memory ghost of Lenore Dove. Suzanne wants us to know that you can't survive a dystopia without love, and Mockingjay has a time jump to the epilogue. Katniss and Peeta are in the meadow where their children play, and, they were 17 when the war ended, and then they had their daughter about 15 years later, and at the time of the epilogue, their daughter also has a toddler-aged younger brother, and Katniss says a thing about it being 20 years later. And no, the names of Katniss and Peeta's children are not in the books, so they are canonically unnamed. Please don't comment, but I thought they were named Willow and Rye, or whatever name that was popular from fanfiction, because they're not. Their names aren't in the book. And if you're gonna leave a comment saying that Suzanne Collins confirmed their names were XYZ, link the article. I dare you. You won't find it. And even if Suzanne Collins said that, it's not book canon because it's not in the book. And no, the Hunger Games fandom wiki is not a real source of information. Anyone can write anything. I'm so tired. A little piece of me dies every time someone attempts to correct me with fan fiction information. Anyway, Katniss narrates about her fears and reluctance to have children, and then the joy after having them. There are no more Hunger Games, and her kids have grown up in a peaceful world, playing in the meadow, oblivious to the fact it was once a mass grave for the people of 12 who did not survive the firebombing. Katniss still has nightmares and days where hopelessness and depression take over. She copes by making mental lists of every act of goodness she's seen someone do, and Mockingjay ends there. The timeline of the Sunrise on the Reaping epilogue is more vague. There's no mention of Katniss and Peeta's children, so it's possible it takes place in the 15 years between the end of the war and the birth of their daughter. Haymitch may have died before she was born, given the state of his health. He would have been around 56 when the daughter was born. Personally, I think if the Everlark children were alive at the time of the Sunrise epilogue, Suzanne would have had Haymitch reflect on that. So I think he died before then. He was 41 at the end of the war, and it would be sort of poetic if he died when he was 50, since he was the winner of the 50th games. What do you think? The biggest crossovers between the ending of the trilogy and the ending of Sunrise are the memorial book and the geese. And also, of course, the meadow. It's the place of renewal. It's the friend of the condemned. Katniss, Peeta, and Haymitch, they were all condemned to die in the Hunger Games, but they survived, and they're able to peacefully enjoy their time in the beautiful meadow. I love the way these were expanded on with Haymitch's POV. Starting with the memorial book, it continues the thread of Haymitch's reluctance to participate in Katniss and Peeta's project. He has been consumed with grief, trapped in his chamber for so long, so it makes sense why he would not see the point of the book at first. But through sharing what he went through, he finds some relief. He's held this in for so long, and it breaks my heart. And it's Burdock's page that compels him to break his silence. We don't know exactly how much he shared about their history at first. It just says he mentioned Burdock showing him Lenore Dove's grave. Maisley was the second person Haymitch gave them details on because of the Mockingjay pin. I really wish that in this epilogue, there was Haymitch's initial reaction to seeing Katniss with that pin. I mean, it's not that difficult to imagine, but still. The impact of Prim getting picked at the Reaping, Katniss volunteering, everybody doing the 3-finger salute, seeing her with the pin, and then Peeta is picked, just memories of Burdock and Astrid and Maisley and what happened to Otho Mellark at the 50th Reaping. Like, that's a whole lot of bricks being thrown at Haymitch and us. I've seen the idea thrown around that the Sunrise movie could start with Haymitch sitting at the table with Katniss and Peeta, telling them the story of his games, and then it's all a flashback, basically. That would be really cool, but I'm not optimistic about it. I just don't know if it fits Francis Lawrence's style of like how he's directed the other movies in the series. We'll see. I wonder if while Haymitch was talking about his mother, Willa May, for the memorial book, if Gale's mom, Hazel, came up. She survived the events of Mockingjay, but I think that Hazel would have reminded him of his own mother. In Catching Fire, Katniss convinced Haymitch to hire Hazel as a housekeeper. And like Willa May, she was a single mother and ran a laundry business out of her house. When Hazel Hawthorne's husband died, she had 3 kids and was pregnant with the 4th, and less than a week after she gave birth, she was out hunting the streets for work. Sounds a lot like Haymitch's ma. He said she didn't miss a beat when his pa died, got right back to work. The reason Hazel started being Haymitch's housekeeper was because people were afraid to go to her for laundry after Gale was whipped. Anyway, I like to think that Haymitch was comforted by Hazel's presence since it reminded him of his ma. Now for the geese. This information that Katniss got Haymitch the goose eggs after hearing about Lenore Dove, and then Peeta made them an incubator? I'm speechless. Haymitch sees how he's similar to Katniss, and Peeta agrees with him. But as I've said throughout this book, Haymitch also shares a lot of Peeta's traits. I see it as Haymitch was more like Peeta before the 50th Games, and then more like Katniss afterwards. His walls came up, and he felt safer as a lone wolf than as part of a pack. But all of these characters grow and evolve throughout the story. Okay, but these goose eggs, they're a thoughtful gift from Katniss and Peeta. I imagine it being more of Peeta's idea, or Katniss suggested it kind of as a joke, like how Haymitch needs something else to do besides drink, and raising geese should be easy enough as a hobby. I love that the Goslings were a team effort from Katniss and Peeta. I mean, she found the eggs, these raw materials to create new life, and then Peeta built the incubator, which was a safe environment for the new life to begin. It lines up with her hunting and his baking. She tracks down the food, and he makes it into something nourishing. Katniss was the spark of the rebellion, and Peeta was the oxygen feeding the flames. Though he also was a spark too. Just, you get what I mean, right? I love the idea of handyman Peeta, just tinkering around and making all sorts of stuff, just picking up new hobbies. Haymitch is the first face the Goslings see, so he witnesses their birth, helping to heal the wounds of seeing all of his other chicks and birds die. When Luella died, she reminded him of a dead Mockingjay chick he and Lenore Dove once found. Lulu is named after a canary with her baby bird's heart. The lost doves from District 6, including Welly, who became a headless baby chick, and of course his beloved Lenore Dove. Plus, Haymitch had that dream of eating eggs while facing Luella and Lulu. Haymitch experiencing the birth of and bonding with these geese, these birds. It's so huge. There's all of that meaning, plus Lenore Dove having had her own flock of geese who she'd take out to graze right before she ate the gumdrops. The fact that he's able to cherish raising geese with their link to Lenore Dove instead of being overcome with despair shows how far he's come. He's made peace with his grief. It's not gone, but he can live alongside it. And get this, Lenore Dove said that she traded eggs for the metal to make Haymitch's flint striker. Gotta be goose eggs, right? She got the eggs from her own geese. And another layer to these geese is that Lenore Dove had them in her will. It was kind of a joke, but she made a will as a cover story for her plot to light the reaping stage on fire, and she'd said that she'd been at home writing her will in case her name got called in the reaping, and then she read this 7-page document to the peacekeepers where most of her worldly belongings went to her geese. Haymitch also compares himself and Lenore Dove to geese since they mated for life. He never fell in love again, which I'm not going to judge as healthy or not. He didn't move on, and it makes sense given the traumatic way he lost his first love and that he avoided having any sort of meaningful relationship with anyone out of fear for their safety. There's some very heated conversations about this online. I don't think there's a right way to feel about Haymitch's relationship with the memory of Lenore Dove. You can think it's romantic and sweet. You can find it depressing or creepy. It can be all of those things. He didn't move on. Whether or not Haymitch explored physical intimacy with other people throughout his life while holding this belief that he'll never fall in love again isn't my business. I know people ship him and Effie because of that kiss in the Mockingjay Part 2 movie. This was not in the book at all. Anyways, these geese in the story are these symbols for loyalty, love, and one of the rebellious songs Lenore Dove sang was The Goose and the Common, which was likely one of the songs she performed before being arrested that final time. That song is about the injustice of the ruling class hoarding resources from the commoners and how the common people are punished for trying to take back what's rightfully theirs. After Haymitch blew up the water tank and briefly thought that he broke the arena beyond repair, he sang that song. And his story ends after the common people have successfully overthrown the ruling class, and he has an abundance of geese who graze in the flourishing meadow that's shared by everyone. Beautiful. Okay, that is it for the epilogue, for part 12, and for the entire Ultimate Sunrise on the Reaping deep dive. I've officially run out of things to say about this book. It only took me over 15 hours and over 300 pages of notes. Haymitch and the whole world of the Hunger Games series exist in my brain as this universe I don't live in, but is very much real. The emotions a good story stirs inside of people is very real, even if the characters are fictional, because a real human mind conjured them. A real human, not AI. All art really comes down to storytelling, and stories foster connection. And, I wouldn't be on your screen right now saying this if Suzanne Collins hadn't told this story that made you and me and so many other people feel something real. Sorry if I'm being corny. Whether you've been watching these deep dives from the beginning or just stumbled across it now, thank you so much for being here. I love reading everyone's thoughts and discussions in the comments, and just thank you all for being so friendly and respectful to me and each other so we can talk about this series that we love. I could not have gotten through this ridiculously extensive deep dive without your support and enthusiasm and encouragement, because this project, it was so much more challenging than I anticipated. It took so much longer. I'm done filming the deep dive. This is surreal. As for what's next, I've seen a lot of requests for a deep dive on the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, and I do plan to do that soon, but before I jumped into that project, I want to make some more one-off videos like character analyses. If you have any other ideas or requests, please share them. A reminder, if you have the means, I strongly encourage you to support food banks. They could always use more donations and volunteers. Resources are linked in the description. Shout out to my Patreon friends. Thank you so much for your support. I love you like all fire. And as always, thank you so much for watching. And if you haven't already, subscribe for more Hunger Games analyses and do the thumbs up thing.